Greetings and welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. Going back to back again. Last week's show featured the aviation, aerospace, military historian Michael Schratt. Michael and I really got into issues. We're back again, and you know, when we were wrapping up the last episode, Michael said, "Well, Richard, I want to talk to you about the Michelin Man sightings," and I'm like, "What?" Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Richard. Great to be with you again.
Absolutely. And also we're going to be getting into anti-gravity research, something you know a great deal about. I would hazard to say you know as much or more than just about any of the researchers in the UFO field about the history of that. So we're going to get into both of those, but we're going to do them into two discrete segments. And how about we just jump right in? Michelin Man. Like when you talk about Michelin Man sighting, I don't think people quite realize that you mean the Michelin Man.
I mean the Michelin Man. Absolutely, Richard. Let's go ahead and pull the trigger on this. Now, one thing I want to state right from the beginning, I want to be completely specific and decisive about this. There is no way that I would move forward with this unless we had a real good paper trail to back it up. Okay. And now that we've got three separate cases, three separate time frames, and three separate locations, I felt there was enough firepower to present this case, and that's what I want to do today.
Fair enough. And we're going to be showing these images, but I will just let people know you've sent me the images in advance, and they are quite interesting. And they seem to show like beings, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head just like we have, but with either suits or a design that's like the concentric tires, you know, going all the way up and down.
Right.
So, okay. So take us where you want to go.
Yep. The first case, Richard, is Reunion Island. This is another one of these epic cases within ufology that are legendary, absolutely legendary. The date is July 31st, 1968. It's 9 in the morning. It took place in the Indian Ocean. That's where this is located. And Reunion Island is located between Mauritius and Madagascar.
Yeah, it's like right off of like even off of Madagascar, which is, of course, off of the southeastern African coast. Right.
Primary eyewitness is a gentleman by the name of M. Luce Fontaine. He's a 31-year-old farmer, and he was in a small clearing in a forest picking grass for his rabbits when he saw this strange oval-shaped craft. He was about 25 meters away from it, Richard, and it was suspended about 4 meters off the ground. It was described as an elliptical or egg-shaped craft about 5 meters wide. The center section, Richard, was transparent, but then it had these blue extremities that were somewhat opaque, weren't quite as transparent as the center section, and they were more blue in color. Now, here's the part that I always thought was very interesting. On the bottom of this elliptical egg-shaped craft, there was this glass or metallic pedestal, and then there was a mirror image pedestal on the top of the craft. So that's something that we can kind of see in the illustration here.
Yes.
Yep. And now, inside this elliptical egg-shaped craft were 2 what are described as quote-unquote Michelin men. Basically, they were 90 centimeters in height. The one on the left had his back turned and faced toward him. So he was kind of like faced a little bit away. The one on the right was kind of completely turned around, but he had his head turned toward the primary eyewitness. That's kind of what the scene looks like here.
Can I just, I just want to interrupt you for people who are not familiar with the metric height. 90 centimeters is roughly 3 feet. It's almost exactly 3 feet.
Yep, that's what we've shown here. Now, next thing that happened, Richard, is both turned their backs on the primary witness, and there was this huge flash, and a strong electrical arc was in the location of where this flash took place. And he also said that he felt this powerful heat wave. And so we're talking about a CE2 case. So we've definitely got physical effects. We've got beings associated. So it's a CE2 and a CE3. And after this took place, Richard, investigators got to the site not too long after this actually took place, and they definitely found effects of radiation. And he
Wow.
actually got sick from this. So there's physical evidence left over from this case.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this image, and I don't know if this was done by one of your artists after the fact, or is this based closely on the witness's description? Because I just have to say, I'm expecting to see Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd break out the weapons blasters and shoot
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, I know.
That's what it looks like.
Just try to illustrate it the best way I could, but and it's consistent with a couple of the other cases here. But in a nutshell, that is the Reunion Island case.
And the witness, obviously, I assume, came across as credible to investigators who spoke to him later.
Correct.
I'm assuming. It's 1968. Wow. I mean, all I can say is wow. I don't know how else to respond to that. If it were a standalone case, I would think, well, he's missing something, or he's misremembering, or didn't see this accurately. Or did you indicate that I just missed how close the witness was to the
25 meters away?
So close, close enough for sure.
Close enough.
Indeed. And that's actually a very beautiful scenery of the surroundings. I assume that is Reunion Island.
Try to illustrate it the best way I could. So,
looks correct. Good. All right, sir. Where are we going next? Is this anything?
We're moving on to the next case. Yeah, I think we're.
I almost don't know how to talk about this one.
I know. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Okay, so it's Lyra, Spain, March 14th, 1976, kind of at night. Primary eyewitnesses are Don Cornell Aegis, who's a farmer, and his wife, age 50. He's age 55. They are the two primary eyewitnesses. Now, they spent the entire day with their son, who is at a naval recruiting center. And around 9:45 p.m., Richard, they left their son and were kind of like heading toward the highway. And the wife noticed this bright light on the left side of the vehicle, or left side of the road. So they're continuing down this road. She said it was kind of orange or white in color and oval in shape. She then noticed, here's where it gets really weird. She noticed a spiral coming out of the ground, Richard. Out of nowhere, in the vicinity of this light, she noticed this spiral coming out of the ground. And the spiral transformed itself into a human figure. The best way to describe this is like Sunday night at the Oscars, Richard. That's kind of what this looked like.
Oh, that spinning. I think I remember this from a long, long time ago. Okay, so spinning and then comes into this form. It
transformed into this humanoid figure, and she said that she could see lights on either side of the figure's face, but it really didn't have a face. It was kind of ambiguous and blank. And this whole being was floating off the ground about 12 inches, and it was described as kind of a dark, tall figure wearing a dark colored suit, kind of what you mentioned in the beginning, these concentric rubber inner tubes.
Yes.
Making up what looked like, quote unquote, a Michelin Man.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, this is similar, but a little different. And by the way, I'm going to challenge you a little bit on that first sighting, because I'm looking at the original sketch that was provided from Reunion Island, and they don't have the funny smiley faces.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I think you were having some fun with your presentation, Michael.
Well, I just tried to do the best I could, Richard. What can you do?
All right. So anyway, back to this one we're looking at, and the shape is, I mean, the tubular horizontal tube circular things are similar, but it seems taller.
It seems taller. Yep.
It seems taller than the other guys.
What's interesting here about this one is the arms were down straight to the side, Richard, and he had clenched fists, which is a little bit different than the other one.
I'm going to take a guess that this couple did not stop for very long.
They stopped after they passed it. They stopped after they passed it. Now, this figure did not walk in any way. He moved by floating. And as we talked about before, he was about 12 inches off the ground. Mm-hmm. This humanoid figure stopped. He remained in a kind of a position where he was just locked where he was once he stopped moving. And then as they passed the being, there was a very serious electrical burned out system on the lighting of their car. So again, now we're talking about a CE2 case because it had physical effects and the lights started flickering. The lights eventually completely burned out. It didn't stop the engine, but it definitely failed the electrical system for the light of the vehicle.
Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, definite
So
effect.
they pass this being, and the wife looks back. She turns around, she looks back, and she could swear that this being was looking back at her, although it had no face whatsoever. So they pulled about another 650 feet forward. They stopped the vehicle, and then two cars passed by. He flagged down those cars and told them about what he had just experienced. And I've got his quote right here, Richard.
Yes.
As he was explaining it to the people in these two vehicles, he said, quote, "It was not of this world, but of another." And so,
Fascinating.
yep, what happened next is he got between these two cars with his car because he didn't have any lights, and they all drove back to about 5 miles from where they began, and then that's where this case essentially ended. So a really good CE2, CE3 case.
And in both of those cases, there are physical effects that these witnesses reported.
Physical effects, absolutely.
So these two are about roughly a decade apart. We go from 1968 to 1976, and from Reunion Island to Spain, you said?
Correct.
So here we go. And you have a third. By the way, I just want people to understand how amazing this is for me to hear Michael Schratt talk about these cases. Michael is the guy who some people think, and they're mistaken, but they think, oh yeah, Michael Schratt's the guy who explains all UFOs as man-made. And that's actually not true about you.
Correct.
But you do look for human technology as your go-to answer, for at least for most of these cases. I do realize that, but not all of them.
Yeah, let's exhaust every conceivable terrestrial explanation before we put forth the ET hypothesis. That's just my mandate, period. I think it's a safe move.
I think it's a reasonable way to go. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yep.
So, third case.
Okay, third case. February, okay, so we've got Friday. It is December 12th, 1977. And this took place in France. It's kind of harder to pronounce it, so I'll just spell it. Rampieux Village in France. Not quite sure how to pronounce that.
Okay.
So the primary eyewitness is a 12-year-old girl. Her name is Chantel. And interesting, the local minister vouched for her credibility, although after this actually took place, the family got a lot of ridicule over this, so they stopped talking about it. So vintage December 1977, the giggle factor was still in place. Now we can see that eroding a little bit today in today's world. It's starting to come down a little bit. All right, so bottom line is she finishes her homework. She goes to the kitchen where there's a window there. She looks through the window and she sees this red orb approaching the backyard. This red orb is kind of elliptical in shape, kind of like the Reunion Island, but without the upper and lower pedestal. And it's basically 7 meters long. It's 3 meters high. Again, elliptical egg shape, kind of all engulfed in a red glowing color, bright red. And then she said that it made an engine noise like a Peugeot 203 before it landed. So this is similar to the 1966 Temple, Oklahoma case where the gentleman said that he heard a drilling noise before this thing took off. So we're hearing this constant thing about whipping of the wind, a drilling mechanical noise, either when these things land or when they take off. Now,
drilling, or sometimes described as a whining type of a noise.
As a whining noise, correct.
Exactly.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So now she said that a strange being rose from this egg-shaped craft, but she could see no seams. There were no doors, no rivets, nothing. She doesn't know how this thing came out, but it just rose from the center of the craft. It passed off to the left, then came back to the center and dropped back down inside the craft. and she could see no evidence of a door whatsoever. The limbs on this thing remain motionless, and she described this, it's in the report, as a Michelin type man with arms that were short, significantly shorter than the other two cases. The legs on this thing were very long. So that's slightly different than the Reunion Island case, but it was still this rubber black suit kind of a exterior for the being itself.
Yeah, we have the drawing here. By the way, this comes with a fairly detailed typewritten report I'm seeing here. Is this a CUFOS case, incidentally, from the Center of UFO Studies?
Nope, I got this from the Gray Barker collection in Clarksburg, West Virginia.
Oh, about that.
That's
so there's one drawing of it here. I'm not seeing a reconstruction by yourself or one of your artists.
Nope. This is a relatively new case that I got, so I haven't done one of this one. But I just want to point out that we're now looking at 3 different Michelin Man cases from 3 different locations at 3 different times. So I think there's enough here to state that there is some validity to these Michelin Man sightings.
What do you think they are? Is this because actually, I mean, we say Michelin Man, and your first reconstruction looks like right out of Ghostbusters to me.
Right.
But in fact, these really could be just our visual interpretations of some kind of astronaut suit, maybe.
Looks like it. This particular case that we've talked about right here, the helmet for the being was cube-shaped, completely different than the other 2. So that's one way this thing differs. It could be a suit, some type of space suit. For what though, Richard? That's the question.
Well, if it was a purely human terrestrial situation, why, you'd have to ask, why would they need a spacesuit for being on Earth?
Exactly.
You wouldn't need it. So I don't know. So I guess you don't really have any. Who's going to have a theory about this, really? I don't know what theory would work on this. This is the frustrating thing. I know you must have encountered this as well with the UFO phenomenon in general, which is it does not behave. We want it to behave in a certain way, whether all ETs, no ETs, all physical material, or all spiritual, or all one or the other, all interdimensional. And it doesn't do that. There are all of these different elements to this phenomenon that seem to contradict each other. They seem to, and then understanding the motivations of the operators of these craft also is, for me anyway, it's been very difficult to make a lot of sense out of what they are actually doing. Like, what are their various missions? What would be the mission of the so-called Michelin Men on these various occasions? What are they doing? What were they doing in Reunion Island, or apparating on the side of the road in Spain in the 1970s in the middle of the night? Like, what is that? Or in France, being seen by this young girl. I don't have. Who can answer these things? I cannot.
No, this phenomenon does not fit neatly in a box.
No,
it does not.
Well, I have to say I'm very glad that you brought these cases out, if only to demonstrate to folks, hey, it's not all about tubes and pipes and everything. There's a lot of really strange humanoid encounters here. So good. Well, do you want to segue into? We've got a good 35 plus minutes here to go.
That's great. That's
to talk about gravity. This is something I know that you know a great deal about. And in advance of this interview, you sent me a great article, The G Engines Are Coming.
Right.
And why don't we talk a little bit about this, just getting into something that I think is not fully well understood, particularly by non-UFO researcher types. I don't think they're quite aware of the story of gravity research in the 50s. Can you get into that?
Yeah. Be glad to, Richard. Be glad to. So before we breach that subject, I just want to touch on one article that I know you've spoken of many times before, and this is the Gung Ho February 1988 issue. And the author of this particular article is a man by the name of Al Fricke, Richard.
Yeah.
And Al Fricke is an alias, and The identity of this particular individual is none other than my good friend Jim Goodall. He's the one who wrote this article.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yep. And a couple of quick things that I wanted to highlight within this article that I think are pertinent to our discussion today. And this is directly from the article here, and it's talking about an SR-71 Air Force officer. Here's what he had to say. He was involved in the development of the Blackbird. Quote, "We are flight testing vehicles that defy description. To compare them conceptually to the SR-71 would be like comparing Leonardo da Vinci's parachute design to the space shuttle."
That's an incredible quote.
Yeah, I know.
It's an incredible statement. And this is an insider who is working on this aircraft that Goodall at Elias Alfricki interviewed.
Correct. Mm-hmm. The article goes on here, quote, this is from a retired colonel, quote, "We have things that are so far beyond the comprehension of the average aviation authority as to be really alien to our way of thinking," end quote.
Yeah, powerful.
Yeah. Powerful.
That's a powerful statement.
Final quote here. This is from a retired Lockheed engineer. "Let's just put it this way," explained one retired Lockheed engineer. "We have things flying in the Nevada desert that would make George Lucas drool."
Yeah.
So when you put this all together, Richard, what are we talking about here? We've heard so much about this gravity research taking place in the mid-1950s, and then these things went black and they were expunged from the aviation press literature. Jane's Defense Weekly, Aviation Week, Space Technology. Is there any truth to this? Well, so I kind of take the Reagan approach to this, Richard, is I like to use the truth but verify, trust but verify, right, Reagan type scenario. And right, where this really began is what you mentioned before, the Young Men magazine, November 1956. This is the exact issue that was anonymously dropped on Nick Cook's desk. And that's what inspired him to write the book Hunt for Zero Point that was published back in 2001. That's a
modern classic.
Yes, correct.
On the subject.
Mm-hmm. And what this article talks about is gravity research by the defense contractors. It talks about atomic and nuclear powered flying machines, nuclear powered aircraft. And so I want to talk about some of the newspaper clippings that actually back this up, Richard.
Good.
And so let's get right into this. So this is Amarillo Daily News, November 26, 1955. Now, this is going to be a little bit wordy, but I think it's important that we lay the foundation here.
We have it here, and we're getting it on the screen while you read it. So just go for it.
So let's go for it. Aircraft industry firms now participating or actively interested in gravity include the following: Glenn L. Martin Company of Baltimore, Convair of San Diego, Bell Aircraft of Buffalo, New York, Sikorsky Division of United Aircraft, Lear Incorporated. So we've got John Lear's father's company involved.
Yeah.
Of Santa Monica, Clark Electronics of Palm Springs, and Sperry Gyroscope of Great Neck, Long Island. So these are just some of the defense contractors in the mid-1950s that were working hard on gravity research.
These are some of the big, heaviest hitters at the time as well.
Correct.
A lot of them have been folded into other companies and merged and so forth. But these were major defense contractors of the time. By the way, I'm sure you are aware of this, but John Lear's father, William Lear, was himself a UFO witness and was quite vocal about it during that period of time. I don't remember his exact sighting, but it was in around the mid-1950s. And the only reason I remember this is that it was written about in one of Donald Kehoe's books. He talked about it quite at length. Just an interesting little side note there. So, but anyway, back to the anti-grav research, we've got major names working on this in the mid-50s.
So I always thought it was interesting, Richard. So you've got the defense contractors spearheading the research, you've got the universities, and then you've got the black budget for over 70 years with countless billions of dollars being poured into these programs. When you put this all together, it's clear that they've done something with this money. They've made some kind of breakthrough. And so let's get back into this here. Amarillo Daily News, November 26, 1955. They talk about here centers where peer research on gravity now is in progress in some form include the Institute of Advanced Study at Princeton's New Jersey, and also Princeton University, the University of Indiana School of Advanced Mathematical Studies, and the Purdue University Research Foundation. So again, hand in hand, defense contractors and universities both working on trying to crack the gravity barrier.
And absolutely elite academic institutions, I might add.
Yes.
Michael, we're going to take a very, very quick break here, and then we're going to come back, and I want to dive right back into this. I just want listeners to stay with us. You're at KGRA Radio. This is the Richard Dolan Show. I'm here with the great Michael Schratt. We're talking about anti-gravity research in the 50s and where it went. We'll be right back. We're back. I'm Richard Dolan here with Michael Schratt on KGRA Radio. Michael, we were just talking about some fascinating organizations, institutions that were delving into anti-gravity research. According to journalists in the mid-50s, we mentioned Glenn L. Martin, Bell, Convair, Sikorsky, Lear, others, and then you mentioned Princeton University, the Advanced Institute of Advanced Study at Princeton, University of Indiana School of Advanced Mathematical Studies, and Purdue University Research Foundation, all centers of pure research on gravity, as reported here. Where did this go? Where are we going here?
Right, exactly. Okay, so let's continue, Richard. So the reference for this is Amarillo Daily News, November 26, 1955. The right on the front page, science launches search for gravity's priceless secret. Subheading, search on for secret of gravity. Changes far beyond atom are the prize. So you can see these guys were really working toward this. They go on here. The initial steps of an almost incredible program to solve the secret of gravity and universal gravitation are being taken today in many of America's top scientific laboratories and research centers. They go on here. A number of major long-established companies in the United States aircraft and electronics industries are also involved in gravity research. Scientists in general bracket gravity with life itself as the greatest unsolved mystery in the universe. That's heavy.
This is like serious buildup on this, with the expectation. It certainly seems to me that like they were on the verge of cracking it and figuring out how to master gravity. Doesn't it seem like that?
It does. It does.
Yeah,
it absolutely does.
The excitement is palpable here.
That's right.
And we know that this very soon is all going to go quiet, but you need to tell this story about why this went quiet, and what happened when it went quiet.
Sure. Okay. So let's continue on here. Reference for this is New York Times, February 7th, 1957. And here they have a couple of brief quotes here. Jesse Vernon Honeycutt, a director and vice president of the Bethlehem Steel Company, declared, quote, "Should the mystery be solved, it would bring about a greater revolution in power, transportation, and many other fields than the discovery of atomic power." You just can't get a more powerful statement than that. They went on here. For example, solving the mystery of gravitational force would be of tremendous import in the field of aircraft design, where the problem of fighting gravity's effects has always been basic. So in this first quote, think about the utilities that would be affected. You've got the shipping industry, you've got the transportation industry, you've got the electrical utilities, you've got the nuclear power plants. All these things would be directly affected if they made this breakthrough, and it looks like they're working toward that.
Absolutely, it does. So this is early 57. And what's interesting? I'd actually had the idea that the news coverage was sort of done by this time, but I guess I was wrong. I thought it was done by the middle or late 56, but here we have an article in February 57. So they're still talking about we're close. Yeah. It's like there's a breakthrough here. Very, very interesting. New York Times.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay, next one, Amarillo Daily News, November 30th, 1955.
Mhm.
The subheading is Experiments Seek Means to Fly Planes Outside Gravity. The current interest in America's aircraft and electronic industries in finding out whether gravity can be controlled or quote unquote canceled out is not confined to imaginative young graduates of engineering and scientific schools. They go on. Aviation as we know it is on the threshold of amazing new concepts. The United States aircraft industry already is working with nuclear fuels and equipment to cancel out gravity instead of fighting it.
Lawrence D.
Yeah.
Bell.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, the excitement is palpable. This is a little earlier, but we're in the mid-50s here. Is there something, by the way, about the Amarillo Daily News? Are they, do they have a particular reporter on the beat who is just diving into this? Do they
Don't
have,
know,
do they have a way?
Richard. That could be. That could be.
I don't know what it is, but I mean, I certainly would think it might be possible. I don't know the story of how that would have been the case. I'm just curious because there are a few of these that are from that newspaper. I think somebody was really onto that, and they're not all from this newspaper. There are definitely other sources that we're looking at here. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, you've got one here. The next one from Interavia.
Correct. That's
What-
correct. Someone
what-
was plugged in. I agree with you, Richard.
Yeah,
Someone was plugged in.
it looks like it. Yeah, fascinating.
So let's go ahead and consider this one. Interavia, volume number 1, 1952.
Volume 7.
Seven. Okay. Air Force atomic engine contract awarded to Pratt and Whitney. An Air Force contract for work on an atomic aircraft engine has been awarded to the Pratt and Whitney Aircraft Division of United Aircraft Corporation. The U.S. Atomic Energy Commission is cooperating in consideration of the nuclear energy phase of this work. So now we've got Pratt and Whitney working with the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. That's interesting
Right.
because they were part of the NEPA program, Nuclear Energy for Propulsion of Aircraft. So now we're seeing this tie-in here.
And Pratt and Whitney was the premier engine manufacturer, I think, of jet engines for the United States Air Force. Isn't that right? Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
correct. That's correct. Yep.
So they're making an atomic aircraft engine. Did this ever get made?
Well, there was a B-36 that flew with a reactor on board, but it did not power the engines, just to see what the feasibility of that would be. So something was done. But in here, if you put that in conjunction with the other articles, I think they could have gone somewhere else with this research.
Curious. So do you think that the an atomic aircraft engine would have a relationship to gravity research, or is that just a separate thing altogether?
Well, the link that we could possibly make, Richard, is the U.S. Air Force, the Atomic Energy Commission, the United States Navy, working in conjunction on that NEPA program. That could have been one of the early prototypes on the December 29th, 1980 Huffman, Texas Cash Landrum incident. Because by 1960, they already spent $990 million procurement funding for the NEPA program. So there's a strong possibility that that particular craft that spewed out all this radioactive material and got Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, and Colby Landrum sick from radiation poisoning, that could have been a direct result of these early prototypes.
Interesting. It's not clear that those types of aircraft or designs went into anything that would be operational. Do you think it's just likely that they were in decades and decades of testing and that sort of thing, or do you think that they actually ever had an operational type of a craft?
I think they had an operational craft, and that may have been connected to the 1966 Temple, Oklahoma case. Because this thing had no moving parts whatsoever that you could see, no wings, no control surfaces. That's what we're seeing over and over again with these elliptical egg-shaped craft. All right, so moving on to the next one. Amarillo Daily News, November 29th, 1955. Spaceship marvel seen if science can outwit gravity. They go on here. Many in America's aircraft and electronic industries are excited over the possibility of using its magnetic and gravitational fields as a medium of support for quote unquote amazing flying vehicles, which will not depend on the air for lift. They go on here. Spaceships capable of accelerating in a few seconds to speeds many thousands of miles an hour and making sudden changes of course at these speeds without subjecting their passengers to the so-called G-forces caused by the gravity's pull are also envisioned. So isn't this interesting, Richard? They're talking about exactly the form, fit, and function of what we're seeing and hearing about UFO reports, where we have these UFOs tracked at 10,000 miles an hour on radar, stopping on a dime, making a right angle turn at 90 degrees. This is exactly what they're talking about in the
Well, they're talking about basically a kind of space-time bubble, it seems to me. I mean, which is really what we're, you know, you hear a lot of these scientists nowadays discussing. I was listening to Hal Puthoff's very, very important lecture at the Society of Scientific Exploration from a year ago, June of 2018, where he sort of hints at this sort of thing with the so-called metamaterial that he's been studying along with Eric Davis and others. The physicist Jack Sarfati actually had some similar thoughts on it in one or two interviews that he has given, most recently on Coast to Coast, where he talks about how this material softens, as he calls it, the space-time barrier, I guess, around the craft, essentially creating a bubble. And, you know, there was the math done in the 1990s by Miguel Alcubierre, which was essentially kind of the math of warp drive, where you create a bubble. And so within that bubble, where you're warping space, as it were, you're actually also warping time, I suppose, but you're creating a bubble within which you're not violating any of the Newton's laws of physics, but you're able to kind of cheat, as it were,
right?
And you're moving at incredible speeds, but you're not subjecting yourself to those G forces. And so here they are in the mid 50s talking about this. That's actually really impressive.
So they're not traveling in a linear mode as we know it.
Right. Exactly. And so you've got, I mean, these little hints, these little breadcrumbs that they're dropping in the 50s that, you know, our scientists, or at least some of our scientists, were figuring out some way of doing this. Now, I'm just wondering how they would have done this. I don't know if this is really your expertise. It's certainly not mine, but what would have caused success to be achieved in mastering gravity? The best that I've been able to understand is in the study of these metamaterials that we're hearing a lot about these days, where it's the material itself that is able to, I mean, Sarfati believes that it can actually slow down the speed of light within it, and that changes all these equations that are necessary, and you don't need a tremendous amount of energy to do this. I don't know if that's the answer, but in other words, to me, it looks like a lot of the answer is in our material science. And it's not clear to me that we had the advanced material science necessary in the 50s to be able to achieve this type of gravity effect. Am I making any sense, or is this not making sense to you?
No, you make sense, because a part of that black budget funding within the defense contractors went to a number of theoretical physicists, Richard, not toward aircraft manufacturing, but actual theoretical physicists. And they figured out that the equations were wrong, and that's the breakthrough.
So which equations? This is what Ben Rich famously said in his moment with Jan Harzan back in the 90s. The equations were wrong. Is this the same thing? And which equations are we talking about?
I think they're talking about the equations for interstellar space travel.
Okay.
You know, like going to Mars, and it's not going to take 9 months to get there. They figured out that there's a way to do it, and so it's just not going to take 9 months to get there.
Have you figured it out so you can tell me and the rest of us?
Have I figured it out? No, I have not. I have not.
Okay. But we think that they, our secret scientists, have figured something out. So, I mean, I don't, it's actually mind-blowing to me. So there's an answer here somewhere.
Yes.
I'm a non-scientist trying to grapple my way through to understand this. So it's tough being out of my depth, but understanding the principles as best I can. I'm not seeing how they did it, but I'm definitely willing to recognize there's a lot that I don't know here. So, so anyway, we've got all of this excitement in the mid 50s.
Right.
And you've got another article out of the Amarillo
Okay.
Daily News from 57, It looks like.
Yep. So November 9th, 1957. And they have a really interesting subquote here. And this is their little subtitle. They say, the jet age is already obsolete back in 1957. They go on here, you old men of 25 or 30 years still plodding along in the jet age, wake up, it says. Jet propulsion is obsolete. The Sputnik will shortly appear as crude as the wax wings of Icarus.
Love that.
I love it, love it, love it. Then they go on here, quote, we are entering the age of anti-gravity space travel. Spherical craft made weightless and propelled by anti-gravity engines may soon attain almost the speed of light, or 600 million miles per hour. This is not a dream. Since 1953, the Canadian government has been working on Project Magnet. At least 14 U.S. universities and other research centers are trying to crack the gravity barrier. Teams of researchers and engineers from 4 major American aircraft companies have anti-gravity designs and data on their drawing boards, proving that whatever goes up does not have to come down.
This is amazing. Again, I want to know who this author was, what he knew, who he was talking to, how there's a story in here, and we can figure this one out. Maybe someone already has.
Plus, if you look at the legacy of some of these craft, Richard, we're seeing these stingers or protrusions or probes on the side of these craft over and over and over again. I've got a case from 1967 that predates the 2004 USS Nimitz F-18 Super Hornet encounter. I've got another case, we talked about the 1966 Temple, Oklahoma, that had a stinger coming off of it. I've got a really good case from 2001 at O'Hare Airport where 2 large stingers are coming off the craft. So
again, what do you think is
again?
What's the purpose of that stinger, of that like little tail or whatever it is that's coming
I know. I'm not 100% certain what it is, but I'm thinking it's some type of a spark gap mechanism where they could be positively charging that probe, negatively charging the craft, and maybe turning it into a capacitor. That's possibly what it's, but it can't be denied. It's we're seeing the same thing on multiple cases going back to the mid 1960s.
This is along the lines, maybe, unless of the experiments of T. Townsend Brown, I'm thinking, where you have, in his case, he had a disc-shaped design, and you have a charge, positive charge on one end and a negative charge, I believe, on the other. And somehow he was able to do that and achieve some a propulsive effect, right?
Right, exactly.
Charge on either end of that, and that worked very well. By the way, one interesting thing in this article here, in this particular one from 1957, is he's talking about spherical craft. And of course, how many times have we encountered UFO reports of perfectly spherical craft? Many times. Doesn't make sense in terms of aerodynamics, but it could make perfect sense in terms of other types of propulsion like anti-gravity, wouldn't it?
Well, absolutely. And the other reason why I'm bringing this up, Richard, is because, as you know, on January 28th, 1986, we lost 7 of the Challenger astronauts because they launched too cold on the day of the launch. The pilot was never told about the big argument that went on between Morton Thiokol and also NASA upper management. Now, if the pilot commander was given a heads up about any concern launching in cold temperatures, he would have called off the launch. And he'd still be here today. But Roger Boegely, as a last-ditch effort to save the Challenger astronauts said, quote unquote, if you launch tomorrow, you will regret the result. And they launched anyways, Richard. They went against Morton Thiokol, the defense contractors. But yet here we're talking 1955, 1957. They're already working on ways to crack the gravity barrier. Why do we still have liquid rockets? Why do we still have solid rocket boosters? This is all obsolete. This is the dream world. This is a matrix we're living in here.
Well, don't you think we're dealing with political and economic and financial consideration?
Sure, absolutely.
I think a lot of folks looking at it, I think that's the case. You've got some of the most powerful individuals in the world are tied into, say, the petroleum industry, which would be significantly affected, not simply in terms of aircraft and aviation, but if this works for aviation, it could work for other types of transportation. You could have like a Jetsons future here. I mean, for real. And if anyone had their ability to have their own little private flying saucer, I mean, it would be a really cool thing for all of us, undoubtedly. But there would be a lot of destabilizing things. There would be a lot of socially destabilizing, politically destabilizing elements of this that actually would not be fun. We would really struggle to be able to contain that. Particularly from a government hierarchical point of view, where you really do want to control your population, but even from an ordinary social peace point of view, you give everyone the ability to go anywhere in the world they want. It's not that we couldn't do it, but I think it would definitely cause people to say, wait a minute, before we do something so radical, so different, let's consider the implications. And there could be some difficult ones. I could easily see that. But also just from the point of view of undermining an industry where, they've got such a great way to monetize petroleum. And maybe there's not an easy way to monetize gravity once you create the infrastructure for it. It might be more difficult.
Well, it would level the playing field.
Yes, absolutely.
That's what it would do.
Yeah. That's right. And when your name is the United States of America and you are standing astride the world, why would you want to give all other nations access to this incredible technology?
Exactly.
I think that has to factor into it. So we've got about 10 minutes or so. You want to keep going here?
Let's continue on here. I want to keep going. Council Bluffs 112755. That's the reference. Subheading: Conquest of Gravity, aim of top scientists in U.S. One almost fantastic possibility is that if gravity can be understood scientifically and negated or neutralized in some relatively inexpensive manner, it would be possible to build aircraft, Earth satellites, and even spaceships that will move swiftly into outer space without strain beyond the pull of Earth's gravity field. They would not have to wrench themselves away through brute force of powerful rockets and through expenditure of expensive chemical fuels. That is the death knell of rockets right there, Richard. Talking about doing away with liquid and solid rockets. Absolutely.
Well, now this article here calls it an almost fantastic possibility. So it's not clear that they're saying, we're about to do it any moment. Right. So there's one thing I would say there. But again, it is part of this theme of, I mean, you didn't see these types of articles didn't appear in the late 60s or in the 70s or 80s, right? At least not until the late 80s. So it did go quiet. So we've got one or two more of these images here you want to show?
Yep, we've got one more. Okay. So this is from Ryan Aerospace, February 1962. And they have the title here, Electricity for Space Exploration. And when you page through this document, they talk about what they're doing, the experiments they're working on, and then they have the quote, within the next 10 years, Richard, electric propulsion will play a leading role in making extensive space trips possible. And the craft that they're working on, Richard, is none other than dish-shaped craft with a dome and a human pilot inside the cockpit.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a classic flying saucer, except they put a little 1960s tail fin on there.
That's right.
Dress it up a little bit.
Yep.
So in the let's see, about 7 minutes left. Where did this research go, in your opinion? Because these articles more or less dried up.
Correct.
By the mid-late 50s, and there are a couple of straggler articles here, like in this 1962. But basically, they stopped We know what happened, or at least what we're.
Before, when you factor in the multiple billions of dollars on classified black budget funding that has no congressional oversight, no public scrutiny, with what the universities were working on, with what the defense contractors were working on, that I feel is enough to make the case that they are building these craft, building these craft, different contractors. Some of this may have to do with some retrievals that we can talk about on the next segment if we do
Right.
that. But
We're
absolutely, for where I'm coming from, they've absolutely done it, Richard. They've done it.
Well, this is a really explicit statement of what 10 years ago I was calling a breakaway civilization, and I think you're making a very strong case for it, a very impassioned case for it. If they've made the gravity breakthrough, that's the
Yes.
foundation right there. So that's a breakthrough that allows you then to make all other kinds of breakthroughs, to go all kinds of places that no one else goes to experience things that the rest of us do not get to experience, and to learn things and so forth. Really, to go off as almost, you could say, a separate civilization that's broken away from our own. So that's what it sounds like you're saying.
Yes, I'm definitely saying that they've done it. They've absolutely done it. I'm definitely of the opinion they've made the breakthrough.
We're definitely going to do another full episode on this when you're able to do it, Michael. But I guess I would ask you, in about 3 minutes we have left here, how far do you think this has gone? So, for example, we can get into more detail later, but there's a 1988 story of the alien reproduction vehicle, ARV. Is that true? Is that a true story in your opinion?
Well, all I would say is the witness that allegedly was a part of this display describes some of the intercomponents of this vehicle as being from the Mercury program. Let's just put it at that. And if you look at the time frame of what we're talking about here, 57, that's the exact same time frame. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say.
You think the answer is yes. So you think, but now that was described as an alien reproduction vehicle. That is something that was used to study, reproduce alien tech. So do you think that that is likely? We're getting into a lot of different things here, crash retrievals, but do you think that is a possibility or a likelihood?
Well, again, going back to the primary witness, mentioned that it was using off-the-shelf components pre-existing within the aerospace industry. And so they were trying to figure out, how can we use what we have to duplicate the form, fit, and function of perhaps something that we may have recovered? That's the big question mark. That's really the big question mark.
Okay, well, the primary witness's name has been out there for a long time. I'm just going to say it. So that's Brad Sorensen.
Okay.
I mean, he's been written about in many times. I mean, I feel bad if he doesn't want his name out there, but the point is, I think what you're saying is we attempted to recreate what we were seeing and used our most appropriate off-the-shelf parts. Is that what I gather what you're saying here?
Basically, yes. There was mention of Mercury era components.
Right.
So, and that's the exact same time frame of what we're talking about here in these articles. So when you put these two together, they're jiving. They're going down the right track.
Well, according to what allegedly was said at that particular time, it was a 4-star general who was talking about these craft, these ARVs, having gone throughout the solar system. So well, if that is the case, back by 1988, this is over 30 years ago, they had already, and as I recall, that witness who looked at it said that these craft looked like they'd been put through their paces. So that would be.
I know. It's not my story, so I don't want to say too much, but if you go back to things that were told to me by Gordon Cooper's good friend, we went to Mars in 1983. Now that's exactly the time frame of what was talked about within this account. So again, now we've got
Right.
2 points that are lining up.
Right. You do realize, sir, we're going to be coming back and doing another interview on this. This is going to be the Michael Schratt series. We're going to come back. There's just too much here to cover.
Yep.
So unfortunately for this, we're out of time. I think people are going to love this interview. I think they've loved listening to it. You started us off with some very interesting humanoid sightings, the so-called Michelin Man sightings, and then got into some very interesting kind of a history of anti-gravity research that I think was very instructive. And see, as far as I'm concerned, we're right on the precipice, you and I here, of getting into some other discussions that are going to take us much, much farther. So I'm looking forward to that, and I hope that you are.
Oh, absolutely, Richard. And thank you for taking the time to cover this gravity research, because I just felt it was so important that we lay the foundation.
Absolutely. Well, that is all the time we have for in this episode of the Richard Dolan Show. I want to thank my guest, Michael Schratt, military and aviation historian, UFO historian, who spent this hour with us. I just want to remind people, if you want to hear Michael and I go further, we are doing also interviews for my site, richarddolanmembers.com. And as always, if you're interested in anything else that I'm doing, please go to richarddolanmembers.com or check out other videos I have on my YouTube site, and you can catch everything that I'm up to, along with my wife, Tracy. So that's it. I want to thank everyone for listening. And remember, while we learn and grow and search for the truth, let's be good to each other. Later.